Evening and welcome to this very important International Women's Day 2024 event. You'll hear from Tammy Shore, the IDF's International Social Media Head. You'll have the opportunity after she speaks to have a Q&A session with her also. All you have to do in order to ask a question is to raise your hand and you'll be picked in order to ask. It's been a while since we've had a Zoom meeting. So just as a reminder, the raise the hand button is at the bottom of the participants list. When I call your name, I'll also request to unmute you. Just make sure that your camera is on, accept the unmute request and ask away. I'd like to welcome Laura Orsi, the International Chair of Israel Bond's Women Division, covering Europe and Latin America, who will introduce our speaker. Laura.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. As Joe said, my name is Laura Orsi. I live in Israel, where my husband and two of my children, my son-in-law, and 4 grandchildren live. I made Aliyah here from Toronto, Canada, almost 6 years ago. It's my true pleasure to welcome you to our Israel Bond's International Women's Day event. Since 1965, many countries have celebrated International Women's Day, which marks the economic, political, and social achievements of women. Come 2024, there is a feeling amongst women that the original goals of this day sounds almost archaic and outdated. Women don't need special recognition, they don't need a pat on the back, and they don't need support from men. Women have proven and continue to prove that they are successful in their own right, in whatever field they decide to focus on and do, and they do an excellent job while facing, in many cases, a patriarchal world. So while thinking about marking this day, it's worth turning the spotlight on the strength of Israeli women in this complex period. The women of Israel on the front lines and the home front have demonstrated amazing and inspiring abilities, especially since October 7. From our lookouts who warned about what was happening beyond our borders and who did not take their eyes off the screens, the medics, the paramedics, the nurses and doctors who worked day and night in the hospitals to take care of thousands of the wounded, the reservists who left everything, mobilized, and help every day, hour by hour, in all positions. The combat soldiers and combat supporters, regular female soldiers and officers, who proved to everyone that they can do everything as well as the men. And the wives of the reservists who face the impossible reality of raising children and maintaining the home and continuing to work, but who are still required to create a rosy and optimistic reality for their children while they feel anxious and worried for their spouses who are fighting on the front. And the tens of thousands of other women who face, like all citizens of this country, an impossible and shocking reality. It's impossible not to mention the women who bravely and cleverly faced the Hamas terrorists who broke into their homes. It's impossible not to be amazed by the kidnapped women. Some of them have returned and others who are yet to return home. Their stories of heroism and inspiration are known only in part from their testimonies by the abductees. And the women of all ages who have shown extraordinary survival skills, wisdom, and sharpness in their dealings while in Hamas captivity. These stories of heroism will join the chronicles of the State of Israel and its proud and difficult heritage. It is with this in mind that I have the great honor to introduce our International Day speaker, Tammy Shore. As head of the IDF's International Social Media Department, Second Lieutenant Tammy leads the diverse team of soldiers running the IDF social media accounts on 10 different platforms and in 3 languages. The unit is responsible for the IDF's communication to global and domestic audiences via traditional and social media. The IDF's spokesperson unit is the 24/7 point of contact for international and domestic correspondents seeking access to and receiving comment from the IDF. The unit also manages the IDF's multi-platform presence on social media. Please join me in welcoming Lieutenant Tammy Shore.
Good evening, everyone. Mainly the ladies that are here on the call. So as Laura so gracefully introduced me, my name is Tammy. I am speaking to you today from Israel. It is a privilege and an honor to be speaking about a topic so relevant to all of our lives on a day such as this of Women's Day. I'll start and say that I'm a daughter of immigrants from the Soviet Union. My parents are from Russia. So Russians had two holidays. We had Women's Day and we had the Day of the Worker. So I was brought up on the importance of a day like Women's Day. And I would grow up seeing March 8th be celebrated as a day to give recognition to the strong women of our lives and the backbones of our families and of our communities, and it's an honor to be considered one today. So the way I'll spend the next 15 to 20 minutes is I would love to go over a few of the defining moments I feel like I've experienced in the last 5 months since October 7th, as a soldier in the IDF, as an officer in the IDF, and specifically from my prism and my perspective as the person responsible for the IDF's media profile and international media perception. So of course we can start with no other date than October 7th. I was here at home and one of my soldiers called me at 6:30 a.m. as the first siren sounded. And I have under my command about 17 lone soldiers. So soldiers who made Aliyah to serve in the IDF. And the soldier was really scared because he never experienced red alerts in Israel. And before our media assignment of reporting what happens in Israel to the world, we as commanders in the IDF has this duty to our soldiers, to the people under our command, to make sure that they're alive and okay. So what happened at the first call is that we guided all of our soldiers to safe spaces around Israel, and then we kind of started to unravel the horrific images that we were starting to get from southern Israel. And throughout the first 24 hours of mayhem and chaos, we were trying to be as reliable as possible, understanding that we have such a heavy duty of distinguishing between all of the chaos and the mass media and the fake news that were coming out of southern Israel that was being echoed by our haters or by people who just wanted to know if their loved ones are okay. And we had the responsibility to make sure that everything that we say has been verified and is completely correct. The next defining moment came 12 hours after that. So the morning of October 8th, apologies. We had a decision because on a normal day in Israel, we have about 100 foreign correspondents, 100 foreign journalists here in Israel. On October 8th, we had about 1,000 who all flew into Israel to cover this breaking war. And at the end of the day, the media is so nuanced and is so dependent on authenticity, and the ability of the channels to authentically verify is a sentence that has been flown around in the coverage of this war. Have they been able to authentically verify the claims of Israel? Have they been able to authentically verify that people were killed, that people were burnt in their cars? So on October 8th, we made people might say rash decision to just stand at one of the kibbutzim at Be'eri and basically let the reporters in. Of course, with strict supervision from the IDF spokesperson without going into people's houses, but everything was still there. There were still terrorists roaming around the villages and around the communities. There was still active combat. None of the bodies were buried. None of the blood was cleaned off. They experienced the battlefield for what it truly was. They experienced the worst massacre Jews went through since the Holocaust. And we could really see the sentiment of the media change from it being, let's call them freedom fighters, or the BBC refusing and failing repeatedly to call Hamas terrorists and choosing the terminology of militant. And you could really see the tone change as from day to day. We'd go to, on the 8th, it was Be'eri. On the 9th, it was Kfar Aza. On the 10th, it was Ksad. On the 11th, it was the Nova side of the party. And I have to tell you that I was born in Israel and I lived here my whole life, but the resilience of the Jewish people is something that blows me away every single time. I was first at the Nova site on October 12th, where it was just horrendous to witness the smell of death in the air, all of the property of people my age, of friends. And it was such a place with bad, no matter where you looked, you would see death. And I went there today again, just to see what happened in those 5 days. And the flowers are blooming, and it's now Passover, so you have willow trees that are blooming. And for every member of the party, for every party goer that was murdered or kidnapped at the party, so 340 young people who were murdered and over 40 who were kidnapped, there's a memorial for them where their friends and their family can go up to, light a candle, say a prayer, and just enjoy the peace and quiet. And it's such a beautiful place. So if anyone has the opportunity to come to Israel in the next couple of months, I truly recommend going there and see what we were able to do with a place that carries so much pain for Israel. The next defining moment came on October 17th. So before the ground operation of Israel started. It was about 8 p.m. We were naturally all on base. And then we have a push notification by Al Jazeera, which is probably when you know something's going to be good. The notification read 500 dead at El Ali Hospital in Gaza from an IDF airstrike. So says Gaza's health officials, which is Hamas. We naturally get alarmed because no one in their right mind will think that the IDF went out to kill innocent people in a hospital. And we pick up the phone and we call the Air Force and we tell them, listen, guys, these are the coordinates. Can you tell us if there was an airstrike over this aerial space in the last 45 minutes? They take a couple of minutes to get back to us and they say, nope. This wasn't us, not a unmanned vehicle, not an unmanned aircraft, not an F-15, and not any of our aircraft. Okay, we understand that this is going to start snowballing and it starts getting more and more media attention, but we understand that this time the facts are really on our side. And as PR people, as PA people, the tension between reliability and relatability and being effective in getting into the news stream, but also staying reliable and truthful is this very fine line that not only as PR people, but also as official members of the IDF, it's always very, very hard to balance. And in that moment, we had to make a decision alongside our spokesperson, Rear Admiral Daniel Agari, on whether or not we're putting out a statement saying, based on first preliminary check, this is not an IDF airstrike or not an IDF strike at all. Or we're risking it. We're taking another hour. We're checking with the Southern Command, with the Intelligence Directorate, with the operations directorate and with our partners in the area to make sure that we're airtight, we're completely sure it wasn't us. And then not only can we defend our name, we can also go on the attack. And we make the decision to wait that 1 hour. And for that hour, the military, because I have to tell you, I've been in the IDF for 6 years. I've experienced a lot of the last rounds with Gaza. And in this war, the IDF understands the importance of the media. So for that hour, every high-ranking general prioritizes checking with their people whether or not the IDF committed the strike on Al Ali Hospital. And after an hour, we know for sure that it was not us. And the general gathers all of the foreign reporters in our HQ in the Kiryat, which is in Tel Aviv, and goes on the offensive. He shows them aerial footage. He shows them for the first time ever what we call as a SIGINT phone call, which is a very highly encrypted phone call between two terrorists that the IDF has listened on. It's a phone call between two Islamic Jihad terrorists, basically acknowledging the fact that they understand it was their rocket that hit the hospital. And then he goes on the offensive saying that we expect more from the media. And we expect the media to prioritize checking their sources and not running a story because a Hamas spokesperson told them to. And the fact that the number, by the way, just a tip, if Hamas says, or if someone says 500 people died in Gaza, that's usually their starting number, especially Al Jazeera. And then you see how it differs. If someone says 500 people died, immediately, 17 minutes after this alleged airstrike on October 17th, we were still counting our dead from October 7th. We were still unable to say how many civilian lives we lost on October 7th. They were able to say that 500 civilians died 17 minutes after the fact. And then for 48 hours, we pulled out every stop possible to make sure that we impact and we changed the online narrative. And we did that on social media. We balanced it out by nitpicking articles by traditional media outlets, by calling out influencers who used their platform to air and to raise awareness for something that is blatantly wrong. We used it to expose more and more intelligence as we got it. And balancing the narrative is something very important. That will open it up for questions. But balancing the narrative is something very important that we have the ability to do on social media. Because on social media, we're not a spokesperson. We're not a face. We're the IDF. And when we see something that is harming our narrative, something that is harming our image online, and something that is causing a snowball effect in the international media, we have the ability to cut in and cut it at the root, because the root of a lot of fake news today is social media. And we have the ability to stop it before it gets to main media, to streamline media. And one example of that is UNRWA, which I'm sure we all know. And for those who don't, UNRWA is a UN organization meant to assist Palestinian refugees in Gaza and in Judea and Samaria. UNRWA has been saying that they're about to shut down and be closed since about October 6th, if they don't get any more gas. And somewhere in November, they said this once again: if we don't get more gas in the next 24 hours, we will shut down all of our operations in Gaza, and there will be no more humanitarian aid reaching Palestinians because we won't be able to deliver it. And at the same time, I had the opportunity to look at aerial footage of Gaza, and I would see Hamas terrorists stopping to gas up, to fill up their tanks of their cars, and they would drive around. And I was like, clearly there is fuel in Gaza. Where is it? So I call up my friend in the intelligence directorate, and I'm asking them, can you tell me the coordinates of this fuel tank where Hamas is getting their fuel from? And he answers, well, honestly, There's 500,000 liters of fuel in southern Gaza that Hamas have completely hijacked, and it's an UNRWA facility. And UNRWA did not put up a fight. We decided to take that information and we tweeted. We tweet at UNRWA and we tell them, hi, UNRWA, these are the coordinates of a storage facility where there lies 500,000 liters of fuel. Please ask Hamas if you can have some. We think it might help. In the next hour, it became the top trending hashtag on Twitter, or on X, as we call it today. Politicians, members of parliament, heads of state use that hashtag as well, and we use it to this day to describe when wrongdoings of UNRWA are blamed on Israel instead of Hamas, which are the ones that are truly hand in hand with UNRWA. So those are a few defining moments that I experienced in the last 5 months. And with that, Joe, I hand it over to you.
Thank you, Tammy. That was really quite eye-opening. I'd like to open up for the Q&A. Remember, please raise your hand, turn on your camera for the question, and unmute and accept the unmute request when called upon. Our first question will be from Anwar Farouk.
Good evening. UK timing is about 6:30, so good evening. Okay, nice to hear all those things. I just would like to know, is there anything like ombudsman, separate, unbiased, inquiry person or a judging person in Israel?
I'm not sure I understand the question.
Ombudsman mean a person who investigates, reports on, and helps settle complaints. And because there are so many things, fake news and all these things. But what is correct?
Okay, so we have soldiers who are responsible for scouring the internet and seeing where we have new reports of new incidents that are happening. And then if we think that this incident is something that might snowball into a larger event, then we have the ability to cross over and check that with our co-partners in the Southern Command or in any arena that is relevant to the case.
Gillian Perry.
Joe, I've just unmuted. I hope you can hear me. Hi, everybody from sunny California. So for us here, it's Boker Tov. For you, it's Erev Tov. Kol hakavod, Tammy. Lovely to hear you speak. If I can be a little bit greedy, I've just got 2 questions for you. How are you dealing with the figures that are coming out of Gaza by the so-called Gaza Health Ministry, which, as you mentioned before, we know is Hamas, because every day those figures are escalating and no one seems to be verifying those figures. Do we see the funerals, etc.? And another question, today I read about the UN rapporteur, Francesca Albanese, and her rather patronizing address to Israeli women, addressing Israeli women as dear ladies, dears. How are you feeling about what's happening in what you're doing, what you're inflicting on Gaza? And I saw it all over the news. So obviously a lot of people are seeing it on social media. How are you dealing with that? So sorry for being greedy, everybody, but this wonderful woman is just being so amazing that I'm just want to use her time.
Thank you, Jillian. So I'll answer for your first question first. So the figure, the 30,000 death toll that has been on every headline possible. So my answer to that, and that's also the official IDF response, we're not targeting civilian population in Gaza. So we are not counting civilian deaths. We are fighting a terrorist organization, several terrorist organizations in Gaza. We can say for sure that we have killed over 13,000 Hamas terrorists inside Gaza since October 7th, and that is the only official figure coming out of Gaza. I understand that the numbers that the Gaza and Health Ministry are putting out are quite overwhelming. But again, we have to take that with a pinch of salt, understanding that these numbers are coming from a ministry that is completely run by the terrorist organization whose goal is to gain from as much civilian trauma and tragedy as possible, to use it against Israel. And as for the second question, I don't know if you read it, but last week there came the UN report, the UN Women International report by Dr. Pramila about sexual assault and about sexual trauma on October 7th, addressing specifically the trauma Israelis went on October 7th. And I think that that report is a historic step in the right direction by the UN, recognizing the trauma and the inhumane behavior of the terrorists of Hamas on October 7th. Unfortunately, the UN has been quite vocal, different UN officials have been quite vocal about their bias in this war, and it has been quite challenging. But I do think reports by UN Women, especially in this month that we've discussed its importance, but reports like the report by Pramila are steps in the right direction, and we can only hope to see more of those.
The next question is from Dr. Chakrabarti.
Toda Rabah, Lieutenant Shor, Erev Tovni Berlin. First of all, thank you for your very moving description, really touched. I mean, when October 7th happened, I was in India and I received the news. I mean, there's less of a time gap, so I almost received the news first, like a couple of hours later, and friends of friends, colleagues, you know, you're going through this yourself. A whole country is going through this. There are two things here. The first thing is, I know my Israeli friends and colleagues and students are very aware of the fact that the Republic of India and are solidly behind Israel in this, and you've seen the support in the social media, in television, at the highest political level, diplomatic. We don't have to discuss this. So I just wanted to put that in record, that this huge country is solidly behind Israel. That's one thing. And the second thing I wanted to say is, at all levels, cutting across religions, castes, languages, blah, blah. The second, I had a couple of quick questions to you. One is, I mean, yesterday I had two very interesting conversations. One was with a Jewish American professor, a close friend of mine in the East Coast, and we discussed this. People are so polarized by the operations in Gaza. And one of the things I'm noticing, even with friends, is they refuse to listen to reason. So what you said is very reasonable, backed by facts. We all know these statistics. As you said, 500 is the starting number. Recently, Al Jazeera had the listening post, and a completely concocted narrative came out of that. Is the government of Israel thinking of producing a documentary, or even a film for that matter, which would have then testimony from the victims? I know it's very painful, especially for the women concerned, but are there thoughts on this direction? And the second question would be, I see what Israel is trying to do on the social media front. You are leading this, I presume. Is there any thought about new strategies? Because what's happening is very clear. There are talking points. In India, we call this a toolkit. So in the sense, there's a toolkit at work. So people are just repeating each other, echo chambers of each other. So there are these key points, and the Republic of South Africa provided a golden opportunity to all these people by this very, in my humble opinion, a totally pointless case in the International Court of Justice. But all this is being used as a toolkit. Now, would Israel think in terms of diversifying its own toolkit? Because this is a very effective social media campaign that is now going on against Israel. And people like me who've been to Israel, who have friends and distant family in Israel, we know this is wrong. But how are we going to convince people all over the world that this is motivated and false? Thank you. And
So I'll answer the first question first. People want to be moved, people want to feel emotion, and we are working on getting those emotions out for people. We just, again, as a military, we have to understand that October 7th is a failure on the largest scale for a military. We have failed our only goal, which is to defend the home front, which is to defend Israeli civilians. And it's a very thin line between using our platforms to give the survivors and give those people who were affected by October 7th a voice to share their experience, but also not using their experience to make it sound as if we're cynically using that. There is one documentary that I recommend for everyone that is interested to see. It was produced in Israel. It's called #Nova. It's a documentary about Nova specifically. It used never before released footage from the phones of the victims themselves. And it's now in a premiere round around the US, and I assume it will get movie theaters around the world in the next couple of months. But there are different documentaries being made. There's the Holocaust Memorial Fund of Steven Spielberg is also working on making a documentary focused more on the harm for the Jewish heritage here in Israel. And as for the second question, it's also important to note that the IDF is only one sliver of the Hasbara, which is a word I try to avoid, but the IDF is only one part of, as you said, the toolkit we have. And we try to work outside of our boundaries as much as possible. We try to talk about things that are, as I said, moving people, things that make people want to empathize with the Israeli goal. But at the end of the day, there are different organizations in Israel that do that as well. You have the Hostage HQ, which are doing amazing, incredible things on social media and are trying to share that human side of this struggle. On the side of the IDF, we're trying to show more diversity, more human values and such.
Elliot Charles, I'm being told you've put your hand up to ask a question.
Yes,
would you like to?
I couldn't find the app, so I had to put my hand up. So apologies.
Elliot, your sound is not so great. Can you speak into the microphone?
Is that better?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, right.
Better, thank you.
Well, I've got to think what is a very straightforward question. Having been if you can hear me, having been in Israel, lived in Israel, and understand the culture. Look, this is a terrible thing. My question is simply this: all the great work that Tammy Shore and her team are doing, my view of what I hear here in the UK is too terrible. It's too awful, and I'm sure attendees to this conference call will feel the same thing. You can scream and shout, Tammy, and do your very best, which I know you're doing. I'm sure, I have no doubt about it. But when the supposed recipient of the message, the BBC, the Sky News, even the political luminaries in this country, in the UK, and these awful demonstrations on the street, when people simply don't want to listen, or even when you're speaking absolute truth and sense, but people aren't interested, it's you're coming up against a brick wall. So the media here and the conversations are not about the truth, they're about these false narratives. I mean, it seems to me it doesn't matter how much fantastic work you are doing, which you are, which is wonderful, if the megaphone, so to speak, is completely blocked and full of these false narratives about these terrible things IDF are doing, etc. To my total sadness, I don't know how you get the message out, because the message is to social media, And the social media simply put up a wall. They're not listening. They don't want to listen. I give you one example, and I hope I'm not breaching confidentialities. There's a particular radio station that I listen to all the time for many, many years, and I phone up and I like them very much. The last few weeks, they have completely gone 180 degrees, and the commentary and the presenters and the people that ring, it's all completely anti-Israel. It was never like that before. So what I'm trying to simply say is, all this wonderful work you're doing, well done to you. But if the people you're sending it to, all these thousands of journalists, aren't prepared to listen and write down what is the truth, what you're saying, I just don't know what can be done, because they are deaf to reason. And my point is, they are intentionally deaf. They're not doing it, oh, we didn't quite understand. They are doing it because they are, I'm afraid to say, completely anti-Israel. I hate to use the word anti-Semitic or anti-Jewish. Let's just say anti-Israel, anti the truth. UNRWA, the United Nations, is exactly the same. Whatever level you're dealing in, the recipient in the street hears the same story. Israel bad, Hamas suddenly wonderful. They're all wonderful, great people. We understand. I've never heard anything like this in my life. And final point is, words are cheap. And all these people that are anti-Israel continue to be anti-Israel. They censor on the news. My last point simply is, words are cheap. Okay, Mr. Anti-Israel person, you're entitled to your point of view. What would you do? What would you do? And of course, you don't get anything. So I'm sorry, long question. Due to complete frustration and anger from my side, forgive me for taking up a lot of time, but Tammy, what you're doing, but if you cannot get the message through, what you do? Thank you.
Don't worry, sir. I share your frustration, but I have to say, I personally, you raised a lot of global topics, but I can only speak for myself. I would not be doing my job if I didn't feel like I have an impact or I have the opportunity to influence anyone. I don't wake up in the morning and tell myself, this is the day I'm going to convince the world that Israel is the best state ever. I wake up in the morning understanding that the human race is a spectrum and that some of them might not necessarily be in favor of Israel. And some of them will always be in favor of Israel. But there's a fair share of people who are just trying to make up their minds or never had an interest of understanding the conflict or what's happening in Israel. And my job is not necessarily to educate them, but to give them a word that has become very polarizing in this world, but to give them context, to give them a piece of information that might lead them on a deeper search of more information, of more context, of more opinions. And we try to do that by giving them content that has high media value, by giving them media content that is not labeled as propaganda, by letting intelligence speak for itself, by giving raw materials as they are. And I understand that maybe as Jews or maybe as people that are living in Israel, it's very easy to be frustrated or to feel as if we're alone in the world or as if no one wants to stand with Israel. But that is quite a wrong perception. First of all, we're having this call and we have representatives here from all over the world. That's a first. So none of us are really alone. And the second of all, the response that we've had from our counterparts from countries that are around the world has been unwavering. So the media coverage might change, but what people do and what people say might be different. What people do has proven that countries still support Israel and will continue supporting Israel. And one commentator will not change an entire country's approach the same way we see with the United Kingdom, the same way we see with the United States, and with different partners of ours around the world. So my message is, don't be too distraught over this. We'll prevail as we have before.
The next question will be from Lynette Jacobs.
Hi, thank you very much. Sorry, this is quite specific to one of the things you just said, Tammy, and thank you very much for everything you're doing so well. Just when you were talking about the United Nations Women's Committee report last week and how they came out and said, yes, like they did finally accept about all the sexual violence that's happened in Israel. But at the same time, they also put in, didn't they, that there'd been sexual violence against Palestinians. I don't know if that's something that you've made the decision not to respond to, or you may have done. I didn't see it, but just wondered kind of how you deal with something like that.
So a UN, of course, thank you. A UN report is not like a reporter's inquiry. They don't necessarily approach us for a response or give us a time slot or a frame to insert our response. We have worked closely with Pramila. I will say for those claims that are raised in the report, they were all thoroughly investigated and found to be completely false. But again, what I said earlier, it's a step towards the right direction. It doesn't mean that it's the perfect step. But yes, we are aware of those allegations.
The next question is from Rosemary and Jonathan Lewis, but it looks like it's just Jonathan on his own. So Jonathan, please.
Thank you very much, Jonathan Lewis. Do you feel able to say anything about the International Red Cross? They say that Hamas will not allow them access to the hostages. Is there any feeling about the International Red Cross in Israel that you feel able to express?
Thank you for your question, sir. I will say that when the IDF, the timeline basically says that we have allowed medication to go with specific, very expensive medication to go into Gaza, with a clause saying that we will only allow it if we allow medication for the hostages to go in as well, and the Red Cross or the Red Crescent will be the body responsible to deliver it to the hostages. The Red Crescent agreed to those terms, and after 24 hours made the announcement that they were unable to carry out their mission. About 2 weeks later, the IDF operated in Nasser Hospital, which is the biggest hospital in southern Gaza, and to no one's surprise, found those packages of medication meant for the hostages inside that hospital used to treat terrorists. And they were brought there by no other than the Red Crescent. IDF and Israel have a huge amount of respect to the Red Cross. They do incredible work. But when it comes to Gaza, once again, we have a phenomenon of international organizations assisting in some ways to a terrorist organization that does not hold the interests of civilians in their hearts. They hold only their own interests, and the international organizations are somehow assisting them in reaching them.
Our next question is a second question from Anwar Farouk. Anwar, if you click to accept the unmute.
Shalom to you and Israel friends. Shalom. And I would like to ask two questions. Number one question is there any impartial and authoritative information center to know what is actually happening? Suppose there are so many fake news. So to filter out all the fake news, I want to know what exactly is the official or impartial news or information. So I want to know what is the source where we can get it. That is number one question. Number two question is when is the war going to end, and when is peace coming to everyone, to our fellow human beings, whoever, because Earth is, as you said, a spectrum of humanity, different diverse people. So when is peace coming, and what are the criteria to get that peace or peace talking, and when are we going to end? Of course, if it is a legitimate need, we have to do, because otherwise they will suppress us. So we have to know when and what to do. That is what, these are the two questions, ma'am.
So as for your first question, I think the most reliable, if I do say so myself, source of real-time information is the IDF Telegram and Twitter channel if you really want just news updates from the IDF side as for what is our activities across all borders and all fronts. I can attest to mainstream media channels as to which one is more accurate. That's not my place. But if you do want real-time updates as for what is going on in Israel, that would be the IDF's Telegram page and the IDF's Twitter page, as well as our other platforms. And I will put in the chat in a moment our link tree for those who want to have easy access to all of the platforms. As for your second question, I would also very much like to know when peace is coming. I will say that the IDF is not a part of the negotiations or the so-called peace talks. Our job is to make sure that the conditions are set for the most beneficial terms for a hostage deal or for a ceasefire, whether it be temporary or indefinite ceasefire. Our job is to pressure Hamas as much as possible to make sure that our terms are met. I am aware that there are peace talks happening as we speak, and God willing, it will bring our hostages home.
The next question is from Rena.
There, can you hear me, Tammy?
Yes.
Yeah, hi, nice to meet you. Tammy, in December, I was in Israel myself, and I actually took on a different turn to doing volunteer work. I was at the Sheba Hospital, so I was able to be a lot with the soldiers and their families. And my question is, how do you cope, and how do everyone cope emotionally and psychologically? What's the toll? I came back ruined after doing what I did. And I can't imagine how you young people are hanging in there. How is your emotional and what toll is it taking on you psychologically?
Thank you for your question. I think that I'll answer this both as a soldier myself, but also as a commander. As commanders, we have a job, which is to make sure that our soldiers are okay and that they're fine and they're able to do their job. But in the perspective of the war, it very much shifted. We had to have very difficult conversations explaining to soldiers, which I hope I gave you some sort of understanding as to how much pressurized our job is and how much nonstop it is. But we told our soldiers, listen, you guys, now is the time for the IDF to fight. Now is our time to push back, to make sure that we do our best to give the combat soldiers the best terms possible. There will come a time for us to cry. There will come a time for us to process. There will come a time for us to mourn. Now is not that time. Now is the time to fight. And naturally, you assess the situation as you go. And with the amount of casualties that we survived, that we sustained, it's completely inevitable to have soldiers lose family, lose partners, lose siblings, and it creates this circle of grief and trauma that is hard to sustain for a long time. But I will say that we remember the cause and we remember why we're here and why we're doing this, and we all know that if one of us falls apart, we will all be there to pick them right back up. And it's a very healthy support system that has proven itself time and time again. So I'm very thankful to say that all of my friends that are in the military have that support system, and we are doing our best to make sure that we are remaining healthy and balanced and are able to perform to the best of our abilities.
Next question is from Helen Steckler.
Good evening, and thank you for being here and all that you do, really for us all over the world as well as Israel. I'm trying desperately not to follow everything on social media because it is quite soul-destroying in its negativity. But I have seen one or two things where there are videos from Gaza with Gazans crying out to the world, saying that Hamas are actually shooting them for every time that there's, they try and protest. Are you officially aware of this type of situation, and can it get out more into the mainstream media? Because I think it's really so important, rather than just on someone's Facebook.
So thank you for your question, ma'am. And we are aware of those videos. We try and track them down as much as possible. My personal view is that we don't necessarily want to paint Hamas as worse than the IDF when it comes to providing to Gazans, at least on the official channels. We do have distribution channels that are more official or less official, and we try to get those videos outside of our own echo chamber, but we are aware of those videos and try to get them out as much as possible.
The next question will be from Aviva. Aviva, can you turn your camera on? That would be great.
Hi. Hello, can you hear me?
Hi, we can hear you. If you could start your camera, that would be great.
Okay, it doesn't happen. Hold on. Unable, it says. Okay, but as long as you can hear me, it's just one question. And thank you for being with us. It's very reassuring. We are not totally on our own here in London. It's really stressful time. One question I have, and it's bugging me non-stop over this since 7/10, and that is why the negotiation for all the hostages are not coming in one go. Why is it always we have to give so many for one or two or just few and release thousands of terrorists back to them? Why is it that I never understand it, and it really annoys me, hurts me, and I don't know if you have the answer, but I'll be grateful for something on this, please.
Thank you for your question. I will say that the IDF, as I said earlier, is not a part of the negotiation, so I won't be able to comment on that as for my lack of knowledge and understanding on the topic.
So I think we have only time for one more question. Raquel Romano, would you like to ask a question?
Hi, I'm from Mexico. First of all, thanks for all. We are so grateful with you. I was supposed to be at school, but I wanted so bad to hear you, so I missed school. I have a quick question. There are so many people who say that Israel is making a genocide with Gaza, and how to respond to that kind of comments.
So thank you for your question. I am not supportive of skipping school, but you do you. My response to claims of the IDF committing genocide is that the definition of genocide is very clear. Genocide is a body committing mass murder with an intent to wipe out an ethnic group off the map. If you look at the IDF's actions in Gaza since October 7th, and you just pick one matter of action, you will see that there is no intent to wipe out or to exterminate or to target a civilian population. For a month, before we started our ground operation, we have been calling on the Gazan population to move from northern to southern Gaza for a month. We've been doing that using our Arabic spokespeople, dropping air leaflets, using the radio stations in Gaza, TV stations, every way possible that you can imagine to try and minimize the harm to the civilian population. Even after the ground operation started, we have been able to localize tactical pauses in specific neighborhoods where we saw that the percentage of evacuations was not high enough to not risk harm to civilian populations, which means the IDF did not operate in neighborhoods where there was a high civilian population percentage. We would do more steps to make sure that more civilians evacuate to a safer zone, and only then would we operate in that neighborhood. When Hamas started blocking the roads to evacuate the people to safer zones, we opened a designated Telegram channel that we made sure was operating in Gaza so that Gazan civilians could text us on that hotline, and the IDF will send troops to make sure that Hamas moves away from the roads and the roadblocks are cleared so that the Palestinians can move to safer zones. What you see nowadays, the amount of effort that we try to make, and I'm not saying that the mechanism we have now is perfect, but the efforts that we are doing to try and get as much humanitarian aid into Gaza as possible. And if you look at even the UN reports, 11 out of the 12 bottlenecks of getting humanitarian aid into Gaza is not on the Israeli side. It's on the UN side. It's on the side of the UN international organizations operating in Gaza. And I feel like any topic that you try and zoom in on the IDF's activities in Gaza, you will see that we have taken so many precautions and so many safety measures to try and minimize harm to civilian population. But at the end of the day, war is war, and this is not a war that we wanted. This is not a war we started. This is a war that was forced upon us on October 7th with a brutal massacre of our civilians. And I also always think that that's a nice fact that people forget in the cycle of our human memory.
Guys, thank you so much. That is all the time that we have for questions tonight. Our next Zoom event is on the 20th of March with the First Lady of the State of Israel, Michal Herzog, discussing mental health in Israel. We're doing this in collaboration with the Herzog Medical Center. Finally, I'd like to ask Elisa Nigri-Greiner to come and have a few closing words. Say thanks to Tammy.
Hi, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Tammy, thank you so much for your speech and this look behind the scenes of the IDF's effort on social media and all the hard work that goes into that. You are really very inspiring and beautiful, and the work you are doing is so important. As a leading woman in the IDF, your role is even more remarkable and essential. We wish you continued success, be'atzlacha, in your work, and all that you give the facts and tell it as it is. I am Elisa Nigri-Greiner. I am the co-chair of Women's Division in Brazil, along with my friend Patricia Lisbona Fuchs. On behalf of Israel Bond's International Women's Division, thank you so much to everyone who tuned in for this event. And a special thank you to our Women Division International Chair, Laura Orzi, for putting this event together to highlight one of Israel's many incredible women. Toda rabah, and I'm Israel High.
Thank you all. It was a pleasure.
Thank you very much, Tammy. Thank you for everybody for your time. Bye-bye.
Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.